The online prostitution website OnlyFans has been in the news quite a lot recently. Last week, a prominent OnlyFans prostitute went viral for propositioning a Five Guys employee while he was on the clock at the burger restaurant. Fortunately, the young man kept his dignity and turned her down. And this week, the same predatory degenerate, I think we should treat these people like mass shooters and try not to use their names whenever possible, has now claimed that she set a world record by having sex with 1,000 men in a 24-hour period. Actually, it was 1,057. Far be it from me to deprive her of that extra 57 strands of gonorrhea she likely contracted. Here she is talking about her big accomplishment.
Yeah, big 1,000 was completely done. So it started off, I'll give you a bit of an overview. After to start with, it was just like the room was absolutely full. Then we did groups of 5, like one after the other of 5s. I wanted to give people more time, so then it went down to like one-on-ones, didn't it? So like one person would watch whilst I was with somebody, and then it would literally just be like a rotating circle like that.
Now, you often hear people, especially conservatives, say that they feel sorry for women like this. I have to admit that I don't. I reserve all my sympathy for whoever owns the Airbnb they used for this stunt. You'll have to go in there with hazmat suits to fumigate that room. Now, you may remember a few weeks ago the story of an OnlyFans prostitute who had sex with 100 men. And these are not the same people. So that woman also planned to jump in bed with 1,000 men. She was apparently beaten to the punch, though. So there's now kind of an arms race among cyber hookers to see who can have sex with the most men in a day. Eventually, someone's going to figure out a way to crack 1 million, which will be a pace of about 11 men a second. I don't see how that's physically possible right now, but somebody will figure it out. I mean, this insatiable quest for sexual self-debasement will be the primary driver of scientific and technological advancement in the future, I have no doubt. And needless to say, business over at OnlyFans is thriving. Back in the fall, it was reported that the website's revenue for the previous year had cracked $1.3 billion. And they're generating all of that money from the approximately 300 million fan accounts on the site. But of course, when we talk about fans, the fans are there for the hookers, or as OnlyFans refers to them, creators. Now, this euphemism makes no sense, of course, because these women are not creating anything. They're selling their bodies, that which has already been created by God Almighty, selling it to the lowest bidder. And they're profiting from their own degradation and humiliation. This is not an act of creation, but of destruction, self-destruction in this case. But whatever you call these women, how many are there? According to recent reports, there are currently about 1.4 million American women producing pornography for OnlyFans. 1.4 million. And the thing is, that number is undoubtedly a rather significant undercount, because it doesn't count all the women who created on OnlyFans in the past. It doesn't count the women who use other platforms to sell their bodies. All in all, it's impossible to know exactly how many women in this country have elected to become prostitutes. We only know that the number, whatever it is certainly well into the millions. This is truly an unprecedented circumstance. Prostitution itself is not new or unprecedented, obviously. It's the world's oldest profession, as the saying goes, and there's nothing necessarily new about having such a high percentage of women in a given population turning to prostitution to make a living. You could almost certainly find more per capita prostitutes in most third world countries than you find here, even with OnlyFans factored in. Historically, it's thought that something like 1 in 5 women in 18th century London were prostitutes, 20% of the female population. Now, there are a lot of OnlyFans creators, quote unquote, but there aren't that many percentage-wise. So the sheer numbers do not reveal the full scope of this problem. As I tried to explain a few days ago, although prostitution has always been prevalent in basically all human societies in one form or another, it has almost always been the province of young, poor, desperate women. So in this country, historically, you would have to drive down to the sections of the city where these women congregated. That's because prostitution was not a part of polite mainstream society. It was kept out on the fringes, in the shadows, in the dank, dark places where normal people would never want to go. And that is what's changing now, and very rapidly. Suddenly, prostitution has become a career option or a way to earn extra spending cash for middle class and upper middle class women. The kinds of women who would never stand on a physical street corner now have the opportunity to sell their bodies on a virtual street corner, and a depressing, I would say even terrifying number of women have jumped at that chance. Some of them have even become multimillionaires in the process. That's another thing that separates old-fashioned prostitution from the newer variety. I mean, there are OnlyFans creators making $20 or $30 million a year. The highest paid star running backs in the NFL don't make that much, or even close to that much. Now, that's not to say that most of the hookers on OnlyFans are raking in millions. The sad reality is that the vast majority are debasing and dehumanizing themselves for the sake of a few $100 a month, at most. I mean, they could earn as much selling homemade candles on Etsy. They could earn significantly more if they went out and got real jobs. Instead, they choose to become masturbatory aids for random, unseen men. And in return, they make enough money to feed their Starbucks habit. And that's about it. It's hard to imagine something more pathetic than that. But even this does not fully capture the width and breadth of this crisis. It's not just that so many women are becoming prostitutes. It's not just that women who have many other options are choosing to be prostitutes anyway. It's that through platforms like OnlyFans, prostitution, or sex work, as it is euphemistically called, is now mainstream. It is a part of popular culture in a way that it never was before. It has been validated, accepted, and therefore elevated so that prostitution is not just a common practice, but a conventional one. The prostitution may be the oldest profession, but it was never considered a normal one until now. Now, this didn't happen out of the blue. The stage was set over the course of decades with the proliferation of internet pornography. Nearly all of the moral guardrails around sex were torn down and replaced with a flimsy, woefully insufficient, consent-based moral structure, which says that anything is permissible so long as both parties verbally agree to it. But, it turns out that just because both parties agree to something, that doesn't make the thing good or acceptable, nor does it mitigate the harm done by it. If you sacrifice your dignity while robbing someone else of theirs, it doesn't matter that you consented to it. A thing is not dignified merely because it was done on purpose with the willful acquiescence of all parties. Most of all, we have removed shame from society. At least we have removed it from the things that are actually shameful. Now, history shows that we can put an end to pretty much any type of conduct, or drive it into the shadows and out of public view so that very few people engage in it, simply by using shame. We stopped shaming whorish behavior, and so now we have soccer moms turning to prostitution for some extra spending money. One follows logically from the other. I mean, consider this. 50 years ago, around half of all adults in the country smoked cigarettes. Now that number is down to about 10%, which actually seems high because, you hardly ever see anyone smoking cigarettes anymore. How did that happen? Well, we cast cigarette smokers out to the edges of society. And this was accomplished largely through shame and social pressure. Our culture has relentlessly demonized cigarettes as disgusting, dangerous, low class, uncool. And as a result, cigarettes went from cool and mainstream to obnoxious and odious. It used to be that you could smoke cigarettes anywhere. Now, cigarette smokers are given like an 8-foot wide box outside 100 feet from the entrance of any building. You see them huddling outside in the cold, pathetically, in their little box, smoking their cigarettes. Society is more welcoming of sex offenders now than cigarette smokers. Now, I happen to think that the anti-cigarette campaigns are quite overdone and hysterical. If I were to make a list of all the kinds of behaviors that I would want to treat that way, cigarette smoking wouldn't even be in the top 50, okay? My point is only that when a behavior is targeted and shamed, even an addictive one, you will end up with a lot less of it. And when it does happen, it will happen out of view on the margins where shameful things belong. So we can't get rid of prostitution entirely. It will always be one of the unsightly barnacles that sort of attaches itself to the hull of civilization. But that's what, if it's going to exist, that's what it should be, a slimy, crustaceous thing clinging to the outside of the ship below the waterline. Okay? Not sitting up on the deck, reclining on a beach chair in full view while the waitstaff serves it margaritas. This kind of behavior should be shamed. And that goes for the customers, the men, as well. You know, most people are not hesitant to call them out, nor should they be. And I guarantee that's going to be a reaction that even to what I'm saying right now, that a lot of people are going, well, you're focusing on the women. What about the men? I get it. We talk about the men all the time. Okay, the shaming of men who do disgusting things happens all the time. It's very popular to do. I don't think that there's a lack of that in the culture. But what no one really wants to do is turn around to the women who are doing these things and saying, what you are doing is disgusting. Because it also goes for the women who choose this lifestyle, who are now, by the way, like the dealers. Like they're now the drug dealers doling this stuff out. And they're not resorting to it out of desperation. They're not forced into it. They're just choosing it. And we should look at that choice with disgust and contempt. Not acceptance, not understanding. We should treat it with shame, which is also the primary reason why OnlyFans and all similar platforms should be outlawed. Prostitution is already illegal in most jurisdictions. It makes no logical sense that prostitution should be legal only if it's done with a camera and sold for a subscription. Doesn't make any sense. Why should the more accessible version of the thing be legal? If anything, it should be the other way around. Now, I prefer for both versions to be banned, but what I'm saying is that to only ban the version that a lot fewer people are engaging in makes no sense. Now, would banning it stop women from selling their bodies online? No, not entirely. It would go a long way towards ostracizing the behavior so that otherwise normal and financially comfortable people do not engage in it. You know, right now there is one side of the ideological divide that wants to actively normalize the most debased forms of human behavior. That's on the left. We know about that. But then the other side, which, though not seeking to normalize it, has largely lost the wherewithal and appropriate sense of moral indignation required to treat shameful things as shameful, which is why the conversation around OnlyFans so often centers on how much pity we should have for the prostitutes, how hard their lives must be, the deep sadness you can see in their poor little puppy dog eyes. There's almost no one stating plainly what used to be commonly understood, that this kind of conduct is disgusting and reprehensible, and we are revolted by it. Now, that message is harsh. It's impolite. It also happens to be true. It is honest. And if the recent history of our culture should have taught us anything, it's that it's better to be honest than polite. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.